I don't know if underrated is the right word to title this video. I know that's what's going to go on the thumbnail for sure. And I know that some of these books are legitimately underrated. Some of them, though, just might not be talked about as much as I feel like they should be. Some of them I just kind of want to draw attention to in one way or another. Today we're going to talk about 7 books, and I could have easily propped this up to like 10 by adding in, because there's legitimately a lot of underrated books that I could be talking about, but a lot of them I talk about so much on this channel. Like, I could have thrown Metro 2033 on here, I could have thrown Revival on here, I could have thrown Hell House on here, but those are some books that I've kind of brought up so many times. I feel like I've talked about them a lot lately, especially Metro 2033. This would be like the 3rd or 4th list video that it's made its way onto, and I thought, we'll give it a break. We'll let it have the day off. We'll talk about these other 7 books. So it's not like a pretty round number, but that's okay. Also, I think I have a pretty good round variety of things. There's like some fairy tales in here. There's a manga in here. There's science fiction. There's fantasy. I got a good round, like, collection of books here. It's not so sci-fi heavy like a lot of my videos tend to be. Anyway, let's go ahead and we'll get right on into it. And we're going to start off with the first book, and that is The Wind Through the Keyhole by Stephen King. I do not hear enough people talk about this, and when they do talk about that, they normally bitch and complain, and it's not fair because this book is so fabulously good. I have said many times on the channel my favorite book series of all time is The Dark Tower, and this is like book 8. It's like this little add-on extra book that you get, and I had read The Dark Tower way back in 2004 or something like that, and 5, I don't know what year it was. Anyway, and so it was my favorite series for years when he dropped this, and I went out and I got it on the day it came out and I read it and I just ate it up. I love it. I adore it. It is such a beautiful story. It is Roland and his quartet gets trapped in a storm and they have to hunker down and they have to wait out the storm. So in the meantime, he's going to tell them a story which goes back to his childhood, and he tells them the story of the time when him and his friends had to go and catch a shapeshifter, and at a certain point in that story they have to hunker down in a jail, him and this young boy, so he takes that opportunity to tell this boy a story, which is a fairy tale. So it's literally a story within a story within a story, but the main part of the story is the fairy tale. It actually doesn't have much anything to do with Roland at all. And it's so, I think that's what threw people off. I think that's what upsets people. It's sold as a Dark Tower book, and then it's essentially a fairy tale that has nothing to do. It's a lore accurate, it's a world accurate fairy tale. The fairy tale actually consists of people that are part of the lore of the Dark Tower series, but it doesn't involve any of the characters whatsoever. So I think that's what's so upsetting to people. But the fairy tale itself is just wonderful, and it's beautiful, and it's a beautiful, beautiful story. It's a beautifully told story, and then it's just so fun with the whole mechanic of it being, you know, a story within a story within a story. So you have to start at the top, you work your way from the main story down into the next story, which is the Skin Changer. And even that's a really good story in and of itself, albeit short. And then you have to work your way down into the fairy tale, and then you have to work your way back out. The whole thing's brilliantly like constructed, brilliantly told, beautifully told. It's just so good. I ate it up. I drank it up. It was, oh, it's just so good. Now, the one thing I will say is it is kind of sold as book 4.5 of The Dark Tower, and I read it originally as an add-on because I had already finished the series when this came out. Then when I reread it a couple years ago, I slotted it in as book 4.5, kind of how it's advertised. It does not work as book 4.5. I do not recommend that if you're reading the 7-book Dark Tower series, I don't recommend you slot it in between books 4 and 5. Go straight from 4 to 5, skip this. It really hurts the flow of the series if you put it in between those 2 books. I recommend reading the series and then just reading this as its own little side piece later. Don't try to fit it into the series. It doesn't work in the series. It really fucks up the flow. But that being said, what a good book. I don't know. Super fabulous, insanely underrated. Next up is the 2-book one, and it is going to be The Heretics of Dune and Chapter House Dune. This is books 5 and 6 of, wow, the Dune series. And they're just so universally hated and so universally shit upon, it's upsetting. I will say they're not the best books in this series. It's not like we're going out of the Dune series on a high point. They are probably definitely a step down from the original trilogy. Debatable with that God Emperor book. That might be my least favorite in the whole series. And I know that's like a controversial thing to say. If you're like one of those people that's like, Dune is the greatest series of all time and God Emperor is the best book in the series, let's be real, it's not that great. It's kind of tedious to get through. Kind of want to beat your head against the wall towards the end of it. There's a specific character that it gets to the end of the book, or if I literally had to listen to him talk for like one more minute, I was going to throw myself off the bridge. Like it was tedious as fuck. But anyway, these books are really fun. They actually are a continuation of the story, of course, but they're like really lead off in some very interesting ways. These people come from like unknown outer space called the Honored Matras, and they're kind of like the evil versions of the Bene Gesserit, and it has some real serious implications to the Golden Path. And it really is a commentary on the Golden Path and what it is and how it is. It really ties into what Leto II was doing in the, fourth book there. Like, it really ties a lot of stuff together. It ties a lot of stuff off. I thought they were good. They were fun books. They might not be peak Dune like the first 1, 2, and 3 books are. They're definitely a step down from that. But just because they're a step down from some of the books that came before them doesn't mean that they are bad. And they are normally hailed as bad. People will tell you, like flat out, well, once you've read the first 4, you can just skip the last 2. Really? Like, really? Were they so bad that you're going to go out there and tell people just don't read them? That's insulting to these books. That's insulting to Frank Herbert himself, I feel. Yes, read all 6 of the books. Make sure you read the last 2 because they are quite good. They might not be 10 out of 10. They might not even be a 9 out of a 10. Might just be like a 6 or a 7, but that's still above average. And that's still better than a lot of books you'll find. And they really do pay off and tie into and continue some of those conversations that we were having in the 4th book, the one that was super fucking tedious to get through. Anyway, quit bashing these books. They're nowhere near as bad as people make them out to sound. Anyway, next up, I guess we have more than 8 books here, because next up I'm going to consider the entirety of the Dandelion Dynasty, the whole thing, all 4 books, the entire series, because it is criminally underrated. I know that it is talked about quite a bit here on BookTube, or at least it was a year or 2 ago, but I still feel like, even when I bring it up, I've talked about it a couple of different times in like TBR videos and wrap-up and summary videos. I genuinely feel like it is still underrated, even with the few booktubers that really push it pretty hard. I still don't feel like it's caught on to the general community in the way that it really, really should. It is, especially Ken Liu. Ken Liu himself is, I would say, arguably one of the most important things to happen to literature in the past decade. I am being absolutely sincere when I say that. I don't care if you're talking about him as an author and his short stories. I don't care if you're talking about him as an author and his epic fantasy series. I don't care if you're talking about him as a translator, as the man who brought us the 3-Body Problem, translated it into English for us, at least 2 of the 3 books. He also translated the Tao Te Ching. And oh my God, among the fact that there's about 300 other translations of the Tao Te Ching, his is so sublime and wonderful. If you haven't read it, this man is a national treasure. It's amazing. And this series is wonderful. It is a fantasy series that spans a couple generations. It follows, these young boys that grow up to be, kings, and then we follow the children of it goes for a couple generations. It's one of the most grand in scope, grand in everything, epic adventure. It is so So good. I will say, even though I loved The Grace of Kings, which is the first book, I just loved it. I was riveted from the first page to the last page. I hear a lot of people complain about it and how it feels kind of like a history book and it reads kind of like a history book. I don't feel that way, but I hear a lot of people complain. And it does really shift gears in book 2 into much more action-oriented and action-focused, and the political drama really takes off. And so I will say, if you're not necessarily interested with the first book, maybe hang in there to the second book. I hate to say that because that is that just hurts my insides when anyone says that about a series. Oh, if you just get through the first book, it gets good in book 2. You shouldn't ever have to say that about a series. And I personally don't feel that way about this series, but a lot of people do. And it really, maybe try the second one if you didn't like the first one. But now we're talking you're having to suffer through 2,000 pages. And if you're not liking something, maybe don't. I don't know. I hate saying that. Either way, super underrated. You go check it out. At least check something by Ken out. Something. Even if, like I said, all it is reading a couple of his short stories. They've won more awards than most people's short stories. Like crazy. He's good. Next up is Opossums by Tsutomu Nihei, and this is a manga, one of the more recent mangas by Tsutomu Nihei. This is the guy who wrote Biomega. This is the guy who wrote Blam. This is the guy who wrote Knights of Sidonia, and this is his most universally, I don't know, I wouldn't say hated, disliked, talked down upon. It's just underrated. People don't really, I don't know, I don't hear enough good things about Opossums, and I read it because it's so polarizing. So many people that really like Blam and Biomega just, you could skip Opossums, it's not that great, which is why I wanted to go see why it was so people didn't like it that much. And I went and I read it and I thought it was great. I just loved Tsutomu Nihei though. Blam is my favorite manga of all time, and this has got some really nice art in it. It's got some nice haunting, lonely, empty feeling art, kind of reminiscent of Blam. Not the same, very different, but reminiscent. And then the story, I think, is just really well done. It's almost like Nihei's take on a shonen story, which, you know, Nihei has interesting takes on pretty much everything he does. He's not a very typical mangaka in that sense. So, you know, he did his Nihei, Knights of Sidonia was like Nihei's take on a harem. This is kind of Nihei's take on a typical shonen arc of a character. You know, oh my gosh, you're going to get this power. Then you have to take out this guy and you power up. And then you take out that guy and you level up. And then, you know, a real typical, but done in a Nihei style. And if you just go into it with that expectation, I think you'd be pleasantly surprised. I know I was. I was quite happy when I came out the other side of this, and the ending's wonderful. Oh, the ending was great. It did feel a little bit rushed in the ending. I think maybe he was told to wrap it up. Maybe? I don't know. I have no idea. I've done no research. But it did feel a little rushed in the ending. But rushed as it was, I thought the ending was one of the best parts. At least I thought it was a satisfying ending. Maybe could have just taken a volume or two longer to really make it feel better. I don't know. Next up on the list is going to be Galactic Pot Healer by Philip K. Dick. Now, I'm sure you know who Philip K. Dick is. I'm sure you've heard of him. I'm sure you've heard of a lot of his books. We're going to say, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? The Man in the High Castle, 3 Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, all kinds of stuff like that. And actually, when it comes to him and it comes to underrated books, I tend to hail Dr. Blood Money as like #1 on that list. But you know what? Nobody talks about Galactic Pot Healer either, and that's a shame, because this book, have you heard of Galactic Pot Healer? Probably not. Have you read Galactic Pot Healer? That's probably even less than the number of people that have heard about it. And once again, like I said, shame. It's a shame. It's such a good book. This guy, the main character in this book is, guess what? A pot healer. What does that mean? He takes pots and he heals them, like legit, like ceramic pots. And he heals them. Anyway, this will then ultimately end up to him being selected by this creature on the other side of the galaxy to be a member of like a 7 or 8 man team of eclectic like nationalities and occupations, vocations, and they're going to go to the other side of the galaxy and they're going to try to save a citadel that has been sunk to the bottom of an ocean, and they're going to raise it up out of the sea. It makes no sense. It's completely insane. But it's Philip K. Dick. I don't know what you expect. And then by the time you get out to this planet and they start going on their mission to raise this up out of the sea, it's like you get to chapters where it's like they're over here, then they're over there. No, we're back over here, but now we're doing this, but now dude, it gets so crazy and out of control. It's insane. But what I will say, so much fun. It is a blast from page to start to the finish. It is so entertaining. It's one of the more entertaining ones that I have read from him. And then you get to the end of the book and the ending's just brilliant. All the way down to like the last sentence actually is one of my favorite lines in the whole book, because it's so poignant, it's so telling, and it's just really meaningful, especially for his character and kind of what he's been through in the book. Even though a lot of what he goes through in this book feels like just a fever dream of Philip K. Dick's, if you know what I mean. But the actual commentary on him as a person and where he lands in the end of the book, I thought was just really brilliant. And if for no other reason, just the entertainment value of it. This is one of those just wild rides that he'll take you on that doesn't have to be the deepest thing in the world. It can be, you can actually read into that a lot. That's one of the ones where you could really skim right across the top and just read it for entertainment, or you can delve a little deeper and try and figure out exactly what Phil's trying to say to you. And both will be fun, entertaining, and rewarding. Next up is Kazuo Ishiguro and the Buried Giant. This is Kazuo Ishiguro. He is a Nobel Prize winning author. I talk about him all the time on the channel. He just fabulous writer. And if you've heard of him, which you probably have, you've probably heard of Clara and the Sun, Never Let Me Go, The Remains of the Day, the big heavy hitters. You've probably even read at least one of those, but you probably haven't read The Buried Giant, or at least in my experience, I feel like this is a much lesser loved of his books. I just don't ever hear anyone talk about it. And if I do hear him talk about it, it's normally like, it was one, like they brush it off like it wasn't that great. And I'm sorry. I read this year and it was just so beautiful and so, I don't know how to explain it. This is like a fable. It's written in the old time past of Great Britain, and it is like that back in the times of like King Arthur or something like that. And it is an elderly aging couple, a man and a woman, and there is a mist that has descended over the land, and this mist makes people forget. Sometimes you'll forget something you did last week. Sometimes you'll forget much more important things from your past. And this old and aging couple has a son, and he moved away over to the next village over or somewhere. And they want to go and they want to visit him one last time before they die, because they know they're getting older. But they need to do it now because this mist is making them forget. And the husband wanted to go like 3 weeks ago, but he forgot that he wanted to go. So honey, we need to go now before we forget. We need to go and we need to journey to try and see our son. And that's where the book picks up. And then the rest of the book is them on this journey through over the landscape and through the mist that makes you forget, on this journey to find their son. And they're also going to learn a few things about themselves, and they're also going to learn maybe a few things about their own past that they may have forgotten, things that they might have forgotten due to the mist, and it might just come back to them through the course of this journey. And it is just this beautiful fable about this couple on this journey. It's not The Remains of the Day. It's not Never Let Me Go. It's not Clara and the Sun. It's just, and if you've ever read anything by Kazuo Ishiguro, you kind of know his sentimentality and you kind of know the magic of this man's writing. It's so simple, but it's so touching. He has a way into your soul, unlike many other authors. It's kind of crazy what he can do with a book. I don't even know. But if you've ever read a Kazuo book and you thought it was good or thought it was touching, I can't recommend The Buried Giant enough. It might not take the crown as the greatest one you've ever read. It's not going to probably overthrow The Remains of the Day for you, or whichever one is your favorite. But if you've read one from him and you have enjoyed it, do yourself a favor and go get The Buried Giant and just go on this journey with this couple to see their son. It's truly touching, and I would say pretty brilliant. And then last but not least, and to be quite honest, this book is the entire inspiration for this entire video. And hear me out, because I know this one you probably really haven't heard of. And that is The Lights in the Sky Are Stars by Fredric Brown. This is a book. I bought this at a used bookstore because I liked the cover and the title. I saw it. I have never heard of it. I didn't know what the hell it was. And I said, oh, The Lights in the Sky Are Stars. What a brilliant title. That's actually a title I want to say for an anime something. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And it's an old quote from something else. But either way, and then I looked at the cover. I love it. I just love it. It was so beautiful. I stood there and I just kind of held it. It was like $3 at the store. And I put it on my shelf and I just let it be a decoration back there for a couple years. And I finally was like, let me read this. And there's no, I don't think there's a digital version of this. I don't think there's an audiobook version of this. I think if you don't have an actual physical copy of this, I don't think you get to read it because it just doesn't exist. That's why I say no one's ever heard it. No one's ever read it. But this book was so touching and so brilliant. Now, I don't want to oversell this one because this is a book. It is about a man and his dream. But I will say most of the book is hold on. The premise is humanity went to the moon and everything like that. And we've done a bunch of missions around and on the moon. And we were pushing a little bit further out into space. And then when it came time to go to Jupiter, we just gave up. The government decided we weren't really learning anything. We weren't really discovering anything. And the costs were astronomical. So the government just shut down all of those programs. We still go back and forth to the moon and stuff. But further exploration out into deep space has all been cut off. This man has a dream. And his dream is space. He wants to keep pushing. He wants to go further. He wants the human race to go further. So he wants to reignite the Jupiter mission. So his plan is to get a senator elected that believes in the Jupiter mission. So lots of this book is how are we going to get the votes? What are we going to do? Well, if I talk to this guy, I can get 10 votes. If I talk to this guy, I can get 20 good votes. So then they eventually get the senator elected. Then it's well, how are we going to get this bill through Congress? Well, if I go talk to this guy, I could get 10 votes. If I go talk to this guy, I could get 10 votes. So if you get 75 pages into this book that I say is brilliant and you're dude, I have heard nothing but senators talk about how to get votes for 75 pages. Don't say I didn't warn you. But all that being said, that's why I say I don't want to oversell this book because a lot of it is just you're trudging through what in political. Oh my gosh. Anyway, but there are some revelations that are going to happen in the second half of this book. Some big ones that happen to other characters around our main character that you can see coming a mile away. They're telegraphed. They're not surprising. They're not. Anyway, you'll see it a mile away. There's other ones that you don't see coming that kind of reframe everything that you've read up to that point. Everything you've believed up until that point gets flipped on its head. You don't even know how to feel about your main character anymore at a certain point. And then it gets to the end of the book and it doesn't end how you think it's going to end, at least not how I thought it was going to end, especially when it gets to the end and the final scene of the book and how that plays out. And just reading the final scene of the book, I had some really legit strong emotional feelings. I was oh wow, that scene hit me so hard. Now, I'm not going to say you're going to be crying or anything like that by the end of this book, but I will say the emotions that pile up by the end of it were really, really powerful. The message was extremely powerful. The journey that this man goes on for his dream and what the things that do work out, maybe the things that don't work out, but it's still really, boils down to at the end of the day, this is a story about a man and his dream. and what we will do for those dreams and how we, oh my gosh, I don't know. I just was so touched by the time I got to the end of this. I was like, man, and I bought this because the cover was pretty. Like, that's literally the entirety of my justification for spending $2 or $3 on it at the store. But boy, was I pleasantly surprised when I sat down and actually read the book. And if you have not, or you find a little copy of it, I'm sure you could find it online. They cost nothing. To give it a day, you can read it in a day, and it's just, I don't know, I thought it was great, and I thought the message that it told and I thought what it had to say was great too. Anyway, is there anything that you guys think is just criminally underrated? If there is, please leave it in the comments below. And as always, the link for my Patreon is in the description below. The link for my Discord is in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.